Welcome back to another episode of The Radio Psychs, your premier podcast for insights into everything mental health. I'm Dr. Aaron Haddock.
And I'm Dr. Rhonda Yu. We're psychologists who care about people and bringing science to practice.
And we're so glad to have you join us.
Please note that the information shared in this episode is solely intended for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical or mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
Today's episode is on understanding panic attacks.
So, Aaron, when we first talked about recording this episode, we swapped some stories about our own experiences with anxiety and panic.
That's right. I thought about a panic attack I experienced in college. It was a strange experience. I had to give a speech in one of my classes, and as I began, out of nowhere, my heart started racing, my hands started shaking and sweating, and my voice sort of began echoing in my head like I was speaking and also in the audience listening to myself speak at the same time, which made me even more nervous.
Man, that sounds terrible.
It was, and it got worse. I began to feel as if it wasn't just my voice that was detached from me, but my very self, too.
So, like you were watching yourself giving the speech?
Yeah, exactly. I knew that my perception wasn't accurate, but I couldn't shake it. Strange.
Oh. Hey, thanks for sharing that. I suspect many of our listeners will find comfort in knowing they're not alone if they've had similar experiences.
Yeah, of course. I think it's important to talk about. I came to understand that what I experienced is a fairly common response to intense fear, anxiety, or stress.
Yeah, that's right. 15 to 30% of people will experience at least one panic attack in their lifetime, with the prevalence peaking in teenagers and folks in their 20s. And women are more than twice as likely as men to get panic attacks, but the reasons for this remain a bit unclear. Now, before we move on, though, I have to ask, what exactly was the presentation on?
Puppetry.
Puppetry. As in puppet shows and the Muppets?
Yeah, puppetry. There I was, panicking over discussing the history of puppetry. Believe it or not, it's a fascinating subject. Did you know that—
Wait. Okay. I'm sure it is, but let's stick to the subject. Actually, this is a perfect segue into our next point because it highlights how panic attacks can happen suddenly without warning, often catching us by surprise.
That's right. Panic attacks may be cued by intense stress or anxiety, traumatic events, or something a person is afraid of, like public speaking or flying. But they can also be uncued and occur unexpectedly when there's no real danger or apparent cause. They can really catch us off guard. So, Rondi, can you explain to us what exactly a panic attack is?
Well, the clinical definition of a panic attack involves a sudden episode or surge of intense fear that usually reaches a peak within minutes, triggering a combination of physical and psychological responses. Symptoms often include a racing heartbeat, sweating, shaking, difficulty breathing, chest pain, nausea, feelings of vertigo, and an acute sense of impending doom or fear of losing control.
Don't forget about the derealization and depersonalization.
Ah, that's right. In other words, sensations of being disconnected from what's around you and yourself.
That's quite a laundry list of symptoms. They can look a lot like those of certain medical conditions, can't they? Like a heart attack, for example.
They can, which can make them all the more terrifying and confusing to experience.
Fortunately, panic attacks rarely last longer than 20 or 30 minutes. So, what's at the root of these intense symptoms?
Let's start with what happens in the brain. When we perceive a threat, whether real or imagined, our body's fight or flight response is activated. Our sympathetic nervous system becomes highly reactive.
This triggers a surge of stress hormones, including adrenaline and norepinephrine, preparing us to confront the threat head-on or flee to safety.
And at the center of this response are two key players, the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala acts as our brain's fear center, detecting potential threats and triggering the fight or flight response.
During a panic attack, the amygdala can become hypersensitive, firing off false alarms in response to seemingly harmless stimuli within the individual's immediate environment.
And to make matters worse, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for regulating emotions and making rational decisions, may struggle to rein in the amygdala's fear response. It's like the brain's fear center is on overdrive, while the rational part of the brain is trying desperately to hit the brakes, sending us into a spiral.
So, as these conflicting signals clash, it can trigger the onset of panic attacks.
Exactly.
But panic attacks aren't just a result of brain chemistry gone awry, they're also influenced by psychological factors. Consider emotional regulation, our ability to manage and cope with our feelings.
Research has shown that individuals who struggle with this are more vulnerable to experiencing panic attacks. And let's not forget about the suffocation false alarm theory.
This is an interesting one. Suffocation false alarm theory suggests panic attacks may be triggered by a misinterpretation of bodily sensations related to suffocation or respiratory distress.
So, for example, if my body interprets a benign sensation like a slight shortness of breath as a sign of impending suffocation, it might set me off.
That's it. And this theory is supported by research showing that those with panic disorder often have a heightened sensitivity to changes in respiratory function.
It's like our bodies are on high alert, scanning for any hint of danger, even when there's none to be found. Attentional bias can also come into play. This is the tendency to focus on and perceive threatening cues in our environment. Studies have shown that people with panic disorder often have a heightened attentional bias towards potential threats.
So it's like our brains have a built in spotlight, shining a bright light on anything that could be perceived as dangerous, even if it's just a harmless sensation or thought.
Right. And this heightened attention to threat can feed into the cycle of anxiety and panic, perpetuating the experience of panic attacks. Aaron, what about cognitive biases?
Cognitive biases, the quirks of the mind that can lead us astray. Research has shown that individuals with panic disorder often engage in catastrophic thinking and probability overestimation, which can fuel panic attacks by distorting our perception of risk and danger.
Basically, our minds become trapped in a loop of negative thoughts and worst case scenarios, amplifying our fear and anxiety. Okay, now that we've covered the what and why of panic attacks, let's talk about how to manage them if and when they happen in a future episode.
Thank you for joining us on this journey to better understand panic attacks. Until we meet again, may you find solace in the calm after the storm and strength in your journey forward.
Take care and be well, everybody.
Take care and be well.